Podesta's emails going back and forth to him and his brother, and there are references over and over again to pizza and pasta that make no sense. Pizza-related maps, things that are obviously code words. And we know in the urban underground that pizza and pasta are supposed to be code words for little girls and little boys. And clearly that's what these emails look like. They're talking about pizza and pasta way too much for powerful people. So someone should have investigated that. They should have. And when they looked at the Instagram photos of the guy from Comet Pizza, those pictures are disturbing. The little girl duct taped to a table, the big room that's somebody joked hashtag kill room or something. These are disturbing things, and for anyone to apologize for that, you put that out there. It's on Instagram. Your comments are there. I don't think anyone would think a comment about a kill room in a family pizza place would be. What kind of humor is that? That's not a sense of humor. And why would anybody duct tape a little girl to a table?
Hey friends, thank you so very much for tuning in. I just want to give you a quick update before we jump into this interview with author Donald Jeffries. Look, if you found this video, then you are on my backup SGT Report YouTube channel. My main channel, if you don't already know this, was given a second community guidelines strike last Wednesday, which means I can't post any videos to my main channel until at least June 6th. That's assuming they don't give me another unwarranted community guidelines strike and just terminate my channel altogether. So please subscribe to this channel. And with that in mind, I want to thank Roseanne Barr, somebody who speaks truth constantly and consistently and at her own peril. Roseanne actually retweeted my tweet the other day. It was a tweet about WikiLeaks' Julian Assange dropping a bombshell that Obama's CIA also spied on French presidential candidates. And you'll notice that the mainstream media firestorm that then ensued after Roseanne then replied to somebody who said Jarrett helped a lot, of course referring to Valerie Jarrett, Roseanne replied to that person's comment. And then all hell broke loose because we have a lying, complicit, mockingbird mainstream media who despises truth. You'll notice that nobody in the media has bothered to cover the original post that was from SGT Report, which was factual about the spying the Obama administration engaged in on President Donald Trump and, of course, on other Western world presidential candidates. That's how you know the media's corrupt. That's how you know it's all fake news, and that's why we thank you for visiting us for real news 24/7 at sgtreport.com. And guys, if you lose track of my videos while my main channel is down, go to sgtreport.com every single day. I always post my latest videos, even if they're from my backup channel, at the top of sgtreport.com. I want to thank you all so very much. I want to thank my patrons, and I want to thank Roseanne Barr for having the courage to speak truth even when it's at her own peril, which clearly was the case in this instance. Now guys, sit back and relax. We have a blockbuster interview for you here, all set to go with author Donald Jeffries. He's the author of Hidden History, an expose of modern crimes, conspiracies, and cover-ups in American politics. And he also wrote the book Survival of the Richest, how the corruption of the marketplace and the disparity of wealth created the greatest conspiracy of all. And that is certainly true. Donald, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
It's a real pleasure, and I have so much I want to share with you today. I want to talk with you about the deep state corruption, which, of course, you're extremely familiar with, given your book, Hidden History. This stuff goes all the way back to the assassination of JFK, and, of course, before that. I'd like to frame this up, if you don't mind, with a soundbite from Charles Ortel, who was just on the Jason Goodman show recently. This is Sunday with Charles, spoiling the revenge of the turds, and listen to this, and you tell me if he's over the target. You tell me if he's right or not. I respect Charles a lot. I've had him on the show before. I think he's very level-headed. He's a great researcher, and here's his thought on the state of the deep state today.
What's happened, I think, is that the plot to really steal control of the United States for a long, long time, away from any opponents of the Obama, Clinton, and dare I argue, Bush establishment machine, that plot I think effectively has now been stopped by Donald Trump and his people, who are now, I think, rather firmly in control, almost firmly in control of the environment in Washington, D.C.
I'll pause it there, and I think it's an important clip because He's definitely a cup half full guy like I am if he thinks Donald Trump has reined in the deep state. I have many tweets and other information to share with you to get your thoughts. But first, your thoughts and analysis on that clip from Charles Ortel. Is he a little too hopeful, or do you think he's right?
I would say he's a little too hopeful. The point that I have, I think, at this point with Donald Trump is that it's really the strangest political situation I've ever seen in my life, because he is basically, when he tweets and some of his campaign rhetoric, a lot of the times he does sound like a so-called conspiracy theorist. He sounds like one of us, but the way he's governed so far has been very disappointing. The deep state is opposing him still, but he continues to surround himself with deep state people. I mean, the nomination of people like Bolton, he still has Nikki Haley as his representative to the UN, who despises him, was a never Trumper, and that's what's been the case with almost everyone he's nominated around him. I really don't understand it, and he continues to talk in many cases the way he did, but governing, so far at least, I mean, he's done a few good things, and his rhetoric, and certainly I was talking to my neighbor the other day, so many of us still admire his refusal to apologize and back down, which so many of these guys do when they say anything remotely controversial. But I really think he needs to do something, and I'm very disappointed, especially in his foreign policy, because I think that is not what he talked about. And what a lot of people voted for him for was because he did say we have to stop these senseless wars, and we have absolutely no business doing what we're doing in Syria, and it's the behest of other powers. They can't be in America's interest. So I really would like to see more of putting America first, which is what attracted me to him and what attracted so many people to him.
He plays a little too darn friendly with Israel and Netanyahu, as far as I'm concerned, and so I agree with you 100% there, but I'm not 100% convinced that Trump is a Zionist, and we can have that conversation, but let's just back up real quick and talk about some of his achievements. The president has confirmed 12 nominees, conservative judges, an all-time record for a first-year president, and that's a big deal. I think those are lifetime appointments. I mean, those are conservatives that will be in position to hopefully rule in favor of truth and justice moving forward, but I also want to say this, what do you make of what's going on in North Korea? That's a very important achievement, and he gets very little credit for it from the mainstream media. Your thoughts on some of his achievements?
Well, it looks pretty good now, but in so much of what Trump does, I looked at it as really unnecessary saber rattling with North Korea. I mean, I try to tell people all the time. That's why, again, I was attracted to Trump saying, let's put America first. Let's build our infrastructure. Let's do stuff we haven't done for decades. Our country is crumbling around us. We have no business anywhere else in the world because we have so many problems at home. And North Korea, sure, the guy on the surface appears to be, a crazy guy, but we've told people forever. And if people read my book that'll come out next year, which is going to be basically hidden history too, and it's about earlier crimes and cover-ups from the American Revolution on, you'll see that our leaders have been demonizing people around the world since the Spanish-American War in 1898, creating false flags and so forth. So is it possible this guy Kim Jong is as bad as he appears? Sure, but I don't think he's as big a problem to most Americans as our own government is. They're the ones that are creating the situation where 50% of the people have nothing. 50% of the people are making $27,000 or less in America today. I was just reading online before the show that they're now saying 50 million Americans can't afford the basics of life. And they're talking about rent, health care, food. Not cell phones and privileges like that. So that's the problem, and our infrastructure, again, is crumbling. I want to see what Donald Trump does as far as the infrastructure, because I think that's a huge, huge issue. But it's nice that North Korea appears to have backed down, but as far as I've looked, North Korea hasn't even invaded South Korea. So, I don't know. And meanwhile, we remain in Afghanistan. We remain in Iraq. We appear to be doing nonsensical things in Syria, where we appear to be going against the most rational guy in the region, and Assad, who was fighting ISIS. So I can't figure out what we're doing anywhere. And I get the impression from Trump's tweets that he can't figure it out either. That's why it's so confusing that he continues to make these decisions here, bombing here or there, or commit. I mean, in the last action on Syria, it literally was a couple days before we said we need to get out of Syria. And the impression is obvious, to me at least, that someone came and had a talk with him and said, no, Mr. President, we're not getting out of Syria. In fact, this is what you're going to do. So I think that's what's confusing him at Trump, is that he almost appears to be in isolation when he's tweeting at 2 in the morning or whatever he does, and you wonder what is going on in those meetings when he's surrounded by, again, really 100% never Trumpers. I don't know of anybody since Bannon left and General Flynn wasn't confirmed. I don't know of a single person in his administration that supported his campaign, at least early on. All of them were initially never Trumpers. So I've never seen anything like this. Kennedy had his Irish Mafia. Carter had his Georgia Mafia. Every one of the presidents have at least some kind of small cadre around them they can trust that are people. I expected to see people like Roger Stone in his administration. Maybe Paul Craig Roberts, people like that would have been great. Maybe Pat Buchanan, but there's not a single one there. So I'm not sure what's going on. And obviously it's still have a long way to go in his administration, but and I would love to give him the benefit of the doubt. And I don't regret voting for him because I tell people all the time I was going to vote for Hillary Clinton. You knew what you were getting there, so you took a chance, and we'll see what happens.
Well, I appreciate the fact that you're saying in some cases you don't know what's going on, because I don't either. And what we do is we try to take the preponderance of the evidence and draw sound conclusions. And, Q has made some mention that North Korea has been a CIA propped up regime for a very long time. And so what Trump has done is he's counteracting that boogeyman that has been propped up and created for decades. And, in Syria, he's defunded the white helmets. He's kicked the CIA out of there, reportedly. And one thing that is really important is that as it pertains to the shadow government, he has dismantled Hillary Clinton's 7th floor shadow government at the State Department, which is a profoundly big deal because, as you mentioned, you and I both know what we would have gotten out of a Hillary Clinton presidency. She's a Rothschild puppet. She's definitely a Zionist. She definitely is in service to herself and everybody else across the globe except for the citizens of the United States. And, I think our goose would have been cooked if she would have got into the office. So, again, that's sort of the cup half full aspect of this thing. Now, you mentioned his tweets. Here's where we really need to be pragmatic about him tweeting so often. He's actually in touch with the people. We would have never gotten this kind of information from any other president, especially Hillary. And here's an important tweet. He retweeted this from David Asman. This was on May 18th, and it goes like this. Apparently, the DOJ put a spy in the Trump campaign. This has never been done before and by any means necessary. They are out to frame Donald Trump for crimes he didn't commit. Really bad stuff. And the reason I wanted to share that with you is because here's the mainstream media's reaction to that. This is unbelievable to me. This is maybe why Charles Ortel is saying Trump's winning, because the deep state, the shadow government, has been laid bare, and they're absolutely like the emperor wears no clothes. So the response was from the Washington Post, and this was also on May 18th, and it was written by Asha Rangappa, who is a senior lecturer at the Jackson Institute for Global Affairs at Yale University and a former FBI agent. And the title of the article is, "The FBI didn't use an informant to go after Trump. They used one to protect him." These people are so upside down on their narrative that they're doing anything to try to save face, and he's already laid them bare as the criminals they are. My question is, when will any of these people be indicted? Comey, Mueller, Clinton, Podesta, Obama for his treason and the wiretapping, which Trump talked about, months and months and months ago, and the media called him crazy, and now it's all being proven true. These people were spying on him. This is treason, sedition. This is crimes that were unimaginable, all being laid bare. I mean, really, the question is, when do the indictments come? When do any of these people get arrested?
Well, I think a lot of us are asking that question: when are people going to be arrested? And I've written a lot about the justice system. Part of Hidden History covers that. I call it the injustice system. But yeah, even as a symbolic gesture, someone like Hillary Clinton, who has spent decades really as almost a mafia, organized crime type figure. I mean, she's the queen of corruption, is what I call her. So someone like that to actually have to face justice like anyone else would that wasn't a member of the power elite would be so symbolically beautiful. Or any of these people, we're talking about any of these people that have been corrupt, that have committed crimes that would have garnered a prison time for people out there in the unwashed masses, if they did it, would be, again, symbolically, it would send a great message that some people aren't above the law. But until that happens, the conclusion is inescapable that the people at the top are above the law. As someone wrote, I quoted him in Hidden History, a guy who spent decades in prison. He said, I never met a single person in prison in all my time there who was even close to being rich before he was imprisoned. So prison basically is for the poor and middle class. So to see someone like a Hillary Clinton there, boy, I mean, we can all dream about that, but and I think that's the problem we face with Trump, is that Trump has, and that's still, I said at the time, even during his campaign, his greatest attraction to everybody were the quality of his enemies. He has genuine grade A. He's got all the right enemies. There's not a single. So that still causes me not to jump completely off of the bandwagon with him, because he continues to be despised like no other political figure ever in my lifetime. I've never seen anyone that has been treated the way he's been treated, mocked and threatened, and people threatening to kill him, and having him want to be beheaded and so forth. Never seen a public figure. Richard Nixon at his finest couldn't come close to matching Nixon for the Trump for the quality of his enemies. But I just wish he would stand up some more and instead of just tweeting. Because if he made some speeches like some of his tweets are, that'd be one thing. But it's almost as if a different person is doing, because he seems to be saying a lot different things in his tweets than he does in his actual policy. So, we'll see. But I'm not a fan. I never have been a fan of the. Huey Long is my political hero. I'm a populist, and I believe that's Tweedledum and Tweedledee. I call them Republicrats, because for the most part, there's very, very little difference between Democrats and Republicans, unless you get some renegade figures. Like right now on the right, Ron Paul would be a renegade figure. Pat Buchanan would be. And on the left, you had people like Dennis Kucinich, I think, that were renegades. But right now, everybody else kind of falls into that Republican narrative where they always opt for war. They always put the interest of the rest of the world above ours. They would rather go bomb Afghanistan and Iraq and rebuild their infrastructure, which we have done, while letting our own infrastructure crumble and basically remain untouched for 50, 60 years.
Yeah, Paul Wellstone back in the day was a renegade too, and of course I didn't agree with his politics, but he was a renegade by opposing the invasion of Iraq, and they whacked him for it. I believe Cheney was personally involved in making sure that plane went down. That's my personal belief. You guys can research the plane crash of Paul Wellstone, and there's very strange anomalies about how hot that fire burned. Everything was absolutely incinerated.
I wrote about that in Hidden History. Yeah, I included a section in there. I have all that stuff in there. Yeah, and you're right. He was. And there's hardly anyone like that now, because Cynthia McKinney was another one. They're out of Congress now. I don't really know who in Congress is good at this point. I guess Rand Paul is okay. He's kind of a watered-down version of Ron Paul. But again, Rand Paul, even though Trump really kind of denigrated him when he was running for president himself, Rand Paul has been a lot more loyal to Donald Trump than any of the other high-profile Republicans have, but we don't see. I would love to see a Secretary of Defense Rand Paul. We'd have a completely different foreign policy, but Trump continues to go to that neocon cabal who despise him. None of these guys supported him, and he continues to promote them. John Bolton, I can't believe John Bolton ever supported Donald Trump ever, but I think Paul Craig Roberts or somebody who said that other than naming John McCain himself, John Bolton was the absolute last person any sane person should put in and have any kind to be a foreign policy, a national security advisor. That was just so disturbing, because this is a guy who wants to be at war with everyone. And you talk about a Zionist, and I don't think it was any mistake that right after he got into office, suddenly we became active in Syria again.
I completely agree. And John Bolton is an absolute toxic Zionist, and it sent absolutely the wrong message. And it doesn't help those of us who are trying to support this president, because we do see the cup as half full. So what I want to do is talk to you about 4D chess. We hear time and time again that Trump is an expert at playing 4D chess. And sometimes I see evidence of that, but I'm starting to wonder if the 4D chess isn't being played against us by sort of the Rothschild international banking cabal, who maybe does sort of own and control this president. Now, here's the thing. Do you remember when he was debating Clinton on the stage in front of a national audience, and he had the balls to say, because you'd be in jail. If I were president, you'd be in jail. I just got goosebumps because I know what a hardcore criminal she is. I know about the Clinton body count. I know about the drug running in MENA. I know about the connections to the Bush family and the CIA. I know about all of it. We know about Webb Hubble. We know about all of the murders these people have been involved in. He was literally standing up in front of the shadow government saying, I'm going to take you on. He was really signing his own death warrant to say that. I've never seen anybody do it. I don't think any other nominee would have said that to her on that stage. So he seems for real, and then he tweets things like this. Let me just read this. This is on May 20th, all factual, for which, of course, CNN ignores him completely. He wrote, "At what point does this soon-to-be $20 million witch hunt, composed of 13 angry and heavily conflicted Democrats and 2 people who have worked for Obama for 8 years, stop? They have found no collusion with Russia, no obstruction, but they aren't looking at the corruption in the Hillary Clinton campaign where she deleted 33,000 emails, got $145 million while Secretary of State, paid McCabe's wife $700,000, and got off the FBI hook with Terry M., and so much more. Republicans and real Americans should start getting tough on this scam." This guy's standing alone against these wins. And at what point did the American people stand up and say, we've had enough, this needs to stop, and the people that have perpetrated this deep state coup need to be arrested and tried for their crimes?
You're right. Trump really is an isolated figure. And again, I go back to, he has no one around him who supports him. There's nobody there. There's not a single person in that administration. First and foremost, Mike Pence, who was an awful pick as vice president, didn't help him at all. But he named people like that who did not believe any of his campaign rhetoric. They don't want to rebuild the infrastructure. They don't want to put America first. They don't want to end the senseless wars. They're all hard-committed neocon Zionists who want our foreign policy to continue to revolve around Israeli interests, which it has since the Reagan administration, at least. And what we're talking about with this corruption and the probes and so forth, they've managed to, and I've fought with the people on the left so much who, for whatever reason, have bought into this Russian collusion nonsense, and they've managed to take very real revelations, primarily by Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, who used to be their hero when he was leaking things about the Bush administration. Then they thought he was cool. He was a renegade who was exposing state crimes. But when he starts leaking about the Hillary Clinton types, then suddenly, he's a traitor. He needs to be hung. But he revealed so many important things in those WikiLeaks documents that proved beyond a shadow of a doubt. I mean, it's right there in their own words that the DNC conspired at the beginning of the campaign to rob Bernie Sanders of the nomination so that Hillary Clinton could be the nominee. But instead of being outraged about that, somehow they've twisted that to mean that Julian Assange is a Russian agent and the Russians actually somehow conspired to rob Hillary Clinton of the presidency. So they've twisted up the very real evidence that shows the DNC conspired to stop Bernie Sanders, who was the party's choice. That was the people who in the Democratic Party in the primaries, they wanted Bernie Sanders. And first and least of all is Bernie Sanders protesting. He's buying the rush. This is the guy that got robbed. And Donald Trump, during a campaign, protested more on his behalf than he did himself. And he certainly let down a lot of people, and again showed why they have these left-right paradigms that are so fake. Because Bernie Sanders, again, is a fake. He wasn't like a Cynthia McKinney or Dennis Kucinich running. Bernie Sanders has supported the Patriot Act and the war on terror and all. He's supported all that. Now, plus he's an awful social justice warrior, which is the reason why so many like me, who ostensibly I'm a populist, but I'm really repelled by so much of the conventional left because of the social justice warrior stuff. And almost all of them are just buying that hook, line, and sinker. And that's virtually all they talk about. But they've managed to, here you had Julian Assange basically naming Seth Rich as the guy who was a source for leaking information about the DNC, and then he gets murdered, shot in the back, and no one cares about that. And again, even Seth Rich's parents don't want to know. They're suing Fox News for one of the few half-ass investigative reports Sean Hannity ever did in his life, when he actually aired a report on the Seth Rich case and raised some of the questions. I was shocked to see that on television, but Fox News had to apologize. And now the Seth Rich family, instead of wanting to know what the truth about what happened to their kid, they are suing Fox News for having the audacity to try to expose some of this massive, massive corruption that's everywhere.
No, you're absolutely right, and I think that family has been gotten to, and that Seth Rich story is one of the most important stories of the last couple of years, but it's right up there with all of the rest of the important stories. Fusion GPS, the fake dossier, the fact that Clinton helped pay for the fake dossier, the fact that the media knows that and won't report on it, and you're absolutely right about the intellectual dishonesty of the people on the left. Look, my false right paradigm was absolutely destroyed once and for all when Ron Paul attempted to run for president, and we saw what the GOP did to him. It's the exact same thing the DNC did to Bernie. The exact same playbook. And in the media, too, in collusion to bury Ron Paul, so to ignore Ron Paul, to not report on the size of his rallies, to make him a non-candidate. But I mean, it was even worse what the DNC did to Bernie, because they literally stole it. It was literally fixed for Hillary before anybody ran, before a single rally, before a single campaign speech. And you're right, the people on the left refuse to break their conditioning. And I don't understand why, because the murder of Seth Rich, and Seth Rich, it is now clear, was the leaker. He was the DNC leaker. And we have the Podesta emails saying, more than willing to make an example of the leaker. We should make an example of the leaker. We've had Kim.com come out and say he's willing to testify to Mueller about what he knows, proving that Seth Rich was the leaker. Assange has made comments about it and alluded to the fact that it was probably Seth Rich, and has offered, I think the reward is now $125,000 if memory serves, leading to the capture of those who actually were responsible for the murder of Seth Rich. And Q says it was Debbie Wasserman Schultz who used MS-13 to take out Seth Rich. I mean, these are crimes so epic. And you and I haven't even talked about the Podesta email leaks, the WikiLeaks Podesta emails that suggest these people are involved in child sex trafficking.
Absolutely, yeah.
Which, by the way, Andrew Breitbart tweeted about in 2011 before any of us had ever heard of Pizzagate. And he tweeted, to him, he's astounded that John Podesta isn't a household name as a world-class underage sex slave op cover-upper defending unspeakable dregs. I mean, that blows me away now because, Breitbart can't say that if it's not true. He'd get sued. And he never was sued for that.
No, he dropped dead of a heart attack. Though supposedly right after. Again, he's one of the most famous figures in the Obama body count, because I do talk about between him and Andrew Hastings. I mean, back to back, Michael Hastings, right? Back to back, Breitbart drops dead at like 42 or something. Literally the day after he says, "I've got the biggest bombshell on Obama. I'm going to show this tape that exposes what he really was at Harvard." And then the coroner dies for good measure. I mean, I've got all that in hidden history. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. I mean, it's
You're right. No, the coroner dropped dead of, I think, arsenic poisoning. This is Breitbart's coroner. And you mentioned Michael Hastings. Yeah, he drives into a tree at 100 miles an hour on Santa Monica Boulevard or wherever it was, and his engine from his brand new Mercedes is back a quarter mile. So his engine blew out of his car. I mean, there are political hits going on. Seth Rich was a political hit. And this corruption, I just never dreamed as a child that I would live in a country this corrupt. And I really still believe that Donald Trump must have been asked by a group of white knights, be they in the Pentagon or I don't know where, that convinced him to run, saying, look, here's the evidence. If the witch gets in, it's all over. As Q has said, it will be hell on earth if Hillary Clinton gets in the White House. You know what she would have done to this country. They'd have taken the guns. They would have opened the borders. It would have been game over for the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. And according to the Weather Underground infiltrator Larry Grothwald, they probably would have rounded up we conservatives in an effort to re-educate us. And if we couldn't be re-educated to their communist manifesto, we'd be terminated. I mean, that's how dark it was going to get. Q has said pure evil. These people are pure evil. And Trump, I don't know. He's standing in opposition to these people. I mean, he's standing up to the Podestas. He's standing up to Comey. He's standing up to Mueller. He's standing up to Brennan. He's tweeted recently about Brennan and how evil Brennan is. I mean, this guy has got balls of steel, and if it's 4D chess being played against us by the Rothschilds, then it's the most brilliant chess game, ever devised.
Yeah, well, I think that's again what the Trump supporters will tell you, that he's playing this some kind of indecipherable chess that's above all our heads. And if he is, okay, more power to him. But I just and you're absolutely right. He has I would when I talk about Trump and everything, I said, look, I can't stand any of his. I mean, he's got the right enemies. That's what continues to let me stay a little bit in his camp. because these people continue to attack him, and he gets the worst press of any politician has ever seen. They don't even attempt to be even I mean, they used to at least feign things with Nixon and so forth, but other politicians that they hate. But I mean, he might as well be President David Duke for the kind of press he gets. And the problem, again, though, is Trump. If I was going by what he was saying on his tweets, then I would say right on. I mean, I'm agreeing with most of what he's saying because he's powerful there. He's passionate. He's saying the stuff that a lot of us out here are saying. At least part of it. I mean, I again, as a populist, I don't expect Trump. He's not going to support a lot of the things I would economically, but as far as foreign policy and certainly on immigration, which is where I get in trouble with the left quite a bit, is why I have so few friends left on the left, because I point out how important, and that's another thing that really got my attention about Donald Trump. He was the absolute first national politician, because you won't see Ron Paul do that. Ron Paul's not going to talk about immigration in that way because he's got that libertarian instinct that, hey, everybody should go where they want to go. And I think that's a weakness of libertarians. But we have to get, Donald Trump said, you either have a country or you don't. I've been saying that for years. You have to do something. And I still would like to see the deportations that are necessary. It's a cruel necessity, but unless you deport millions of the illegals that are already here and that are draining resources and taking jobs that we don't have and we can't afford for our own citizens, the situation's never going to be. You cannot have any kind of amnesty. He cannot give whatever kind of DACA nonsense there is there. You can't have that. You have to say, look, if you're in the country illegally, I'm sorry, you have to go. Maybe you can reapply later, but the fact is we have too many people as it is now. When you have three prospective workers or whatever it is for every potential job opening, and many of which pay nothing to begin with, but you can't possibly, the last thing any sane rational person would be doing is letting immigrants come into the country legally, importing foreign visa workers, which is another thing I was disappointed. Trump continued to talk tough about the H-1B visa program, but he had a chance to end it last April with a stroke of a pen, and he didn't do it. And that was something that would have been easy to do, and no one can defend the guest worker and visa program because we have people in this country that can do those jobs. They just won't do them at the salaries they pay the foreign workers for.
Yeah, it's interesting, the whole immigration issue. And by the way, I do want to wrap up this conversation circling back to Israel and Zionism. So if we can do that, but the immigration thing is very interesting because, again, you'll see what the media did to him as he called out the brutal satanic crimes of MS-13. These gangs literally will rape, murder, and butcher people, cut them apart into little pieces. And, he wants to round them up and export them, get them out of the country, deport them. And, of course, he was hung out to dry by the media when he referred to the MS-13 evil gang members as animals, which is what they are, and they're also Satanists, by the way. But let me ask you this. Let's talk about the good news that Donald Trump, and I think his administration, is heavily targeting pedophiles and human traffickers. Guys, if you go to whitehouse.gov right now, just type into the search area human trafficking, and you're going to get a lot of news about what this administration is doing, but you're going to get a statement from Donald J. Trump himself saying, President Donald J. Trump is working to end human trafficking. My administration will focus on ending the absolutely horrific practice of human trafficking, and I'm prepared to bring the full force and weight of our government, whatever we can do in order to solve this horrific problem. And Donald, you'll remember that Steve Scalise, who's really one of his I think at this point, probably one of his biggest defenders in Washington, D.C. Steve Scalise did a PSA about the problem of human trafficking in cities all across the United States, and then a would-be assassin tried to shoot him at a softball game. So yes. I think this administration really is targeting some of the vilest creatures on the planet that were creatures that hitherto, up to this point, were protected by Hillary Clinton. I mean, look no further than the Clinton Foundation in Haiti and them coming to the aid of Laura Silsby as she tried to traffic 33 children out of the country. So your take on Donald Trump combating human trafficking?
Well, I've heard those numbers, and I certainly that's commendable, obviously. And in Hidden History, I had a whole section about the Franklin credit scandal, the Keepers, McMartin preschool. This thing goes back way far, and Pizzagate's just the latest in it. But anyone who studied this history, and that's why whatever happens as far as human trafficking, they have to go after the head of the beast. So if they get some people lower down the chain, that's fine. Anyone involved in that is obviously despicable. But the people at the top, they have to. to go after the people that are really engineering this and making it work, because it's undeniable. When you study the backgrounds of these powerful figures, their go-to thing when they get money is to have sex with kids. And we can't begin to understand it, but it's there over and over again. They have a predilection for it. A lot of us think that the reason so many of them in power do is because they're kind of picked, because they are blackmailable, because of this urge they have that almost no one would understand or have any sympathy for. But it's undeniable. The reason why human trafficking is so popular is because the people at the top enjoy this themselves. And it goes back to the Franklin credit scramble. These were very important people involved in that. The McMartin preschool, if you remember the publicity about that, back in the 80s, 90s, and the media was so overtly on the side of the preschool, even though afterwards they found the tunnels that children were discovering. Even though the majority of the children who involved, these were preschoolers, had damage to their rectums and vaginas. There was sexual trauma there, visible damage. So they weren't making this stuff up, but you wouldn't know it from the coverage of the media. And this is why in Pizzagate, for instance, those of us, I refuse to bet. Alex Jones, somebody like that, is apologizing for Pizzagate. That's ridiculous. I mean, again, these are emails that were released through WikiLeaks. Again, great disclosures by WikiLeaks and Assange. And they're Podesta's emails going back and forth to him and his brother. And there are references over and over again to pizza and pasta that make no sense. Pizza-related maps. I'm going to be eating pizza for 2 hours. Things that are obviously code words. And we know in the urban underground that pizza and pasta are supposed to be code words for little girls and little boys. And clearly that's what these emails look like. They're talking about pizza and pasta way too much for powerful people. So someone should have investigated that. They should have. And when they looked at the Instagram photos of the guy from Comet Pizza, those pictures are disturbing. The little girl duct taped to a table, the big room that's somebody joked hashtag kill room or something. These are disturbing things. And for anyone to apologize for that, we're not accusing anyone of anyone, but you put that out there. It's on Instagram. Your comments are there. I don't think anyone would think a comment about a kill room in a family pizza place would be what kind of humor is that? That's not a sense of humor. And why would anybody duct tape a little girl to a table? I mean, just crazy stuff. But people, you can't back down. And again, I think that what I run into so much when I go down these rabbit holes, because that's really going down the rabbit hole, is the average person just doesn't want to go there. They don't want to believe how bad it is. They don't want to believe that people that are respectable, the leaders of their community, are doing these horrible things to little children. But it's undeniable that something's there. So I'm glad if Trump is going after that, but I would like to see some of these big figures. And of course, that could start with his friend Jeffrey Epstein. And we know that Trump, along with Bill and Hillary Clinton both, had ridden on his so-called Lolita Express plane to go to that island he has, where apparently lots of underage girls are there for the rich folks to enjoy.
I'm nodding. I'm actually working on a new video about some of this. I'm not sure if that video will go up first or this interview, but you're absolutely right. And as far as those pedophile code words go, there's so many more than just pizza and pasta. There's handkerchief, map, walnut sauce. Map, my understanding refers to semen. Walnut sauce refers to the pineal gland. Which
hot dogs.
Hot dogs. I mean, it's just absolutely appalling. It's mind-boggling. And you're right, those Podesta emails are indefensible. But even more so are those Jimmy Comet, James Alefantis Instagram posts. That kill room is one of the most disturbing posts I've ever seen in my life. And if you read the comments, guys, I'll put that up on the screen right now. Read those comments. They're absolutely indefensible unless you're into this stuff. And for anybody who thinks these people aren't into this stuff, I'm going to read you this from The Spectator. This was written by Charlotte Metcalf in July of 2008, guys. Think of how long ago that was. None of us had any idea that Pizzagate and Pedogate was quite as systemic as it is. Now, of course, Donald, you mentioned the Franklin cover-up. We know that these things have taken place over time. We know about Jimmy Savile. We know about the cover-ups, the Hampstead cover-up in the UK. Cover-up after cover-up after cover-up. But until these WikiLeaks emails came out, we didn't realize that it was potentially this systemic within our own government, within the DNC, within the Podesta circles. So this is from 2008. The Establishment Pedophile, How a Monster Hid in High Society. Roger Tooke was a pillar of academia with an enviable Chelsea address. He was also a vicious pedophile. Guys, I'm sorry, I'm going to read this, and I'm sorry if you don't want to hear it. Turn off your headphones right now because this is so sick, but this speaks directly to what Donald was just saying about those Podesta emails and the Elephantis posts. Here it goes. The 5-year-old girl cowers naked and crying in a corner. She is so frightened that she urinates. One of the men in the room hits her repeatedly. The others laugh. Another man picks her up and throws her face down on the bed. Then the men rape her. She dies soon afterwards of atrocious injuries. Guys, this was written in 2008. It goes on, and I'm going to just read a little bit more. It's so sick I won't read all of it, but people have to understand that really this is what these people are into, and this guy was a high-profile art guy in the art world. Now think of James Alefantis' connections to the art world. He has a secretive art museum business in Washington, D.C. there. So it goes on. This is the scenario that the respected art historian and curator Roger Tooke boasted repeatedly about in internet chat rooms to fellow pedophiles. In the chat rooms, Tooke relates how a Dutch man bought the child in Cambodia, kept her for a week, and how Tooke was part of the group who enjoyed, quote, splitting her apart one night. Folks, you can't make this stuff up, and this was written in 2008. The guy, Roger Tooke, he only went to prison for 4 years, and reports are that he killed himself in like 2011 or 12, as far as I can tell. But, I mean, this is what these people are into, and you're right. Our friends, neighbors, and colleagues don't know about it, and they don't want to know.
No, they don't want to go there because, again, it's so disturbing, and people don't want to confront something that monstrous or that incomprehensible. But again, we look into the Podestas you mentioned, Tony Podesta, his brother, John Podesta's brother, him and his wife. They've had articles talking about the artwork and the disturbing images of children, and they have a series of pictures of naked teenage photographs in their house. And I'm just thinking, okay, again, these are elitists, and it crosses over into my other area of concern, which is the disparity of wealth and the corruption in the marketplace, because we see time and time again, there's one rule for the elite and one rule for everyone else. The pedophiles, the common pedophiles, there's so much hatred out there among the public for pedophiles, and lots of times they wrongly call someone a pedophile. If you're attracted to a 16-year-old girl, that's not accurate to say that's pedophilia, but still we kind of lump everybody into that same category. But you have guys that were 18 years old and were having sex with their 16-year-old girlfriends that are sitting in prison because of statutory rape. But again, they're average people, though. But on the other hand, celebrities and wealthy people like the Podestas, they can have pictures like that, which would be considered child pornography. If they were hanging up in the houses of a lower middle class couple or in a project somewhere, and somebody saw that, social services would, especially if they had children, social services would have those, would have the children, they'd be gone in the home, and they would be, charging them with something. Possession of child pornography. But we see this time and time again when it's an elitist, it's considered art. Or there's always, Pete Townsend of The Who, a group I greatly admire. He was caught with tons of child pornography some years ago, and his defense was he was doing research on it. Well, okay, couldn't anybody who's turned on by that stuff say that? But the average person, that would not be a defense to say that. We saw that with Lawrence Taylor, an NFL player who was caught having sex with an underage prostitute, and she was even demonized as a prostitute, where if that had been just a regular poor guy that had been caught, first of all, he would have had no chance of ever being acquitted, but they would have referred to the girl more accurately as a runaway. They would not have called her a prostitute. They would have understood she was forced into that life. But because he was a celebrated figure, and he came up with a ludicrous defense because his semen was found in a condom at the scene. He said he masturbated into the condom. That was his defense, and he was acquitted. And that's the kind of system we confront, where even the worst crimes imaginable that would carry a heavy prison sentence. And that's why I think it's distinction when we talk about Donald Trump or anyone going after child trafficking. Who are they going after? It's kind of like the drug war. Do we really, if you want to have, top heroin dealers that are connected to the Golden Triangle or whatever, or something like that in the Asian world, okay, you go after them, you're going after some bigwigs, but you're going after users. You're going after people that are selling small amounts of pot. again, you're not going to stop any kind of problem. And that's, again, for people that think, I personally believe all drugs should be decriminalized. I'm definitely a libertarian on that. But that's the problem. You have to go after the powerful figures. So with the human trafficking, you have to go to the absolute top. And I don't know that Donald Trump, because he obviously, he runs in the 1%. He's a billionaire. So he has to know, whether it's Epstein or any of these other guys, he has to know some of these people that are into sex with underage children. I mean, there's no question about that. So would he have and if he did ever really attempt to go to the most powerful figures, I think you'd see him slandered and attacked by the mainstream media like never before.
Yeah, I think you're right. But one thing I'd say, again, in his defense is, they've wiretapped him. They've done everything they can to bring him down. And the best they have is Stormy Daniels, somebody that he had purportedly, not even proven to be true, purportedly had sex with before he was ever a politician. I mean, the American people don't care about it because at least the American people that are awake don't care about that. Of course, we want a moral president, but obviously they're trying to target him for anything and everything, and that's the best they've got. That really speaks to his character, in my opinion. And I'll say this, too, about the sex trafficking, the human trafficking. This whole NXIVM arrest of Keith Raniere and Allison Mack is potentially a big deal. I mean, yes, I would agree they're low-level fish, but you got Bronfman's tied into that. You got all sorts of Clinton Foundation. I think even the Rothschilds have been implicated on some level. So this is a big deal because as long as Allison Mack stays alive, reportedly she's singing like a canary, and because she's facing 15 years to life, I believe. Yeah. I mean, so this is a big deal, and I do think this administration is going after the big fish, but maybe slowly but surely, because, again, he can't even get Clinton indicted for her epic crimes while she was the Secretary of State, much less the Clinton Foundation crimes, much less any child trafficking stuff. So, I mean, it's tough standing against these winds of tyranny, and I think... Oh, go ahead.
No, I agree with you, and I have every understanding in the world and great empathy for what anybody, whether we're Donald Trump or if he's sincere or not, especially if he is sincere, trying to go up against this deep state and this swamp is mind-boggling to even attempt it. I understand that, and I'm glad you brought up the Allison Mack thing because lots of us used to love Smallville. We were great fans. Versus this, I think this has the potential really to open lots of people's eyes because she's still a high-profile figure to a lot of us that remember that show, and she's so kind of wholesome-looking. And this is an actress, so how did she become ensnared in this? And the guy, the Svengali-like figure, and you mentioned, I suspect the Bronfmans will, because they're probably the shadowy figures that are financing this stuff, and they're at the top. Again, they're kind of international. You go into the Seagrams and all the the liquor business and so forth. So if they focused on their involvement, I'd be shocked. But it's going to be interesting to see where this goes. If they try to make a scapegoat out of an isolated figure like Raniere and maybe make it all his fault, and then everybody else, maybe Allison Mack does sing and gets off with a light sentence. But for someone of her stature to go to prison for anywhere near 15 years would just be shocking. And just what we've heard about that, it's obviously a really and it really, we mostly heard about the adult females there, and it seems like they're trying to downplay the child trafficking charges. And
the mainstream media is. You're right about that. The mainstream media won't touch it. Again, though, I mean, imagine how corrupt this mainstream media is. Even when there's a high-profile arrest like that, and it's very newsworthy. If you tune into CNN as often as I do, I go run on the treadmill at the local club. It's the only time I watch that scummy channel, but it's because I want to keep an eye on the enemy. And the only thing they'll talk about is Trump's delusional, Trump's tweets, Stormy Daniels. And they won't touch these other things, these hardcore facts about human trafficking, which, I guess stands to reason because as I've tweeted out and covered in videos many times before, Jake Tapper's wife, Jennifer, was interviewed by the Washingtonian. You guys can Google this. Washingtonian, Jennifer Tapper, and it was about her being a mom. This was a full year before anybody had ever heard of Pizzagate. And she was asked what their favorite restaurants were. And she said their favorite date night restaurant was Buck's Fishing and Camping, which is right there in Alephantis land there in D.C., and I think partially Alephantis owned. And their favorite family restaurant was Comet Ping Pong. I mean, you can't make that up. What are the chances? I've been to Washington, D.C. World-class restaurants as far as the eye can see. Those are the two she names? I mean, it's a little suspicious. But you hit the nail on the head in your book, Chapter 17, Where Do We Stand Now? The case for government by elites is irrefutable. Government by the people is possible, but highly improbable. Longtime U.S. Senator J. William Fulbright. Guys, I must confess, I told Donald before we started the call, I have not had the chance to read his book yet. I got it about a week and a half ago. I very much appreciate it. It's called Hidden History, an expo of modern crimes, conspiracies, and cover-ups in American politics. I know that I have to read it now after talking with you, Don. There's so much in this book that we just talked about in this conversation. I didn't know that. His other book, Survival of the Richest, How the Corruption of the Marketplace and the Disparity of Wealth Created the Greatest Conspiracy of All. Before we go, I just want to round out the conversation with this question of Rothschild Zionism. We know the power of the ADL, the SPLC. The SPLC, now my understanding is, can weigh in on which speech should be shared on YouTube and which should not. You'll notice that my recent interview with Christopher Bolin about what really happened on 9/11 was terminated. It was deleted by YouTube, and I was given a strike, a community guidelines strike, even though I didn't violate any community guidelines. Your thoughts about the power of the Israeli lobby in this country and about Trump's chumminess with Netanyahu?
Yeah, and that's been one of the most disturbing things about him. It's funny because I'm 61, so I go back a ways, and I can remember where in the past the primary criticism of Israel came from the right, where you had conservatives who really used to be critical of Israeli influence in our politics, especially. But over time, it's very funny. Today, you see almost no criticism of Israel on the right. And this is kind of tied in with so many Christian fundamentalists who are Zionists and who believe that the Jews are the chosen people and Israel's the chosen country. And so therefore, no matter what they do, we have to support it or we're going against God, which is just ridiculous. But the only person on the right I know now that is still critical of Israel is Pat Buchanan and Ron Paul as well, if you put him on the right. But all the other criticism comes from the left. So it's really a strange situation because there's clearly, to put Israel, especially since the days of the Reagan administration, where again, that's where really the right came to the alliance so much with Israel, is that the neocons were born. And basically the neocons were a lot of former communists, but certainly a lot of former leftists who became so-called conservatives, but they called them neocons because of their background. And their primary concern was foreign policy, and that foreign policy centered around what is best for Israel. And so U.S. foreign policy from that point forward has been focused almost directly and centered around the interests of Israel. I think that's why Donald Trump saw so much flack in his campaign when he first started talking about all this money we've been spending on these senseless wars, trillions and trillions. We could have rebuilt America from top to bottom, which was fantastic rhetoric, and someone should have said it a long time ago. But I'm sure it infuriated that Zionist lobby and the Rothschilds. Does anyone think it's that it's a coincidence that of the three countries that have become demonized as American enemies today, you have North Korea, which does not have a Rothschild-controlled central bank. Neither does Iran. Right. Syria has a central bank, but it's not controlled by the Rothschilds. So those are the three countries in the world, and they all share that very important thing in common, and I think people should understand that. And most Americans, it kind of goes over their head when you say that, and I think that's why so much enmity is being focused on these countries and why they're being demonized to such a great degree, because they're not falling in line. And if people understood the banking system, Henry Ford said it a long time ago, there'd be a revolution tomorrow. And if people understand how we are a part of a counterfeit system. Every person in serving time in prison for counterfeiting should be released immediately, because they're doing whatever they did is nothing different than every bank in this country does every day of the year, because every time they create a loan, it only has to have a fraction of those assets on hand, 10% or less. So that's why 90% of every loan that is made by a lending institution in this country under the Federal Reserve System is created out of thin air, because it's not there, and obviously 100% of the interest is. So just imagine the impossibility of ever trying to call in. You couldn't pay off the loans. The money's not there. So if people understood this kind of funny money game that's there, and that's the reason why another thing Donald Trump talked about was auditing the Fed, which is a huge thing. But we'll see if that audit, we had a partial audit just a few years ago, and they found trillions just that had been given out to corporations and banks around the world. If you could really audit that Fed and see what's going on and abolish it, because we ought to have honest money, then you'd have a different foreign policy. If people in control weren't these Zionist Rothschilds who had an interest in these banking systems around the world, then I think you'd see a different foreign policy in a different country.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. And I wanted to round out the conversation with this subject, Zionism, the Rothschilds, the international banking problem, because it is really at the core of truth. And, I've often said to people who ask, how do we know who to trust? I say, well, you can listen to everybody, but follow those whose tree bears fruit. And this is one of those subjects. Do the people you listen to talk about Rothschild Zionism? Do they talk about false flag operations like 9/11 and the evidence that suggests the Mossad was involved in what happened on 9/11? By the way, that's why my interview with Christopher Bolin got deleted, guys. So look no further than truth tellers like Donald Jeffries, who's not afraid to go there. You mentioned Pat Buchanan. I'll throw Robert David Steele in there as one who's also a critic of Zionism. Yes. And it just needs to be said, guys, that if the people you're listening to won't talk about this particular subject, you probably ought to tune them out or listen far less, because at the core, when you go all the way down the rabbit hole, if you want to challenge Q, if you want to say Q's a LARP, if you want to, if these people want to make a big deal about those of us that cover Q information and the breadcrumbs that do lead to baked bread and very interesting things that would have otherwise gone unnoticed, ask them why they won't talk about Rothschild Zionism, because at the end of the day, it's a very, very important topic. And Donald, I want to thank you so much for your time. You've been a great guest. I thought we'd go a half hour, 45 minutes, and here we are pushing an hour.
That's great. I appreciate it. I'd love to talk to you anytime.
All right. Well, I really appreciate it as well. And your website, correct me if I'm wrong, is donaldjeffries.wordpress.com?
That's correct.
All right. And guys, the books are Hidden History, an expose of modern crimes, conspiracies, and cover-ups in American politics. And by the way, the foreword to that was written by Roger Stone. And the other book, Survival of the Richest, How the Corruption of the Marketplace and the Disparity of Wealth Created the Greatest Conspiracy of All, by author Donald Jeffries. Donald, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, it's my absolute pleasure. And guys, thank you so much for tuning in. If you valued this information, please share it within your own sphere of influence. We need to wake people up. We just covered the hardcore facts, and you know what? We just scratched the surface. Donald, we'll have to get you on again in the future and have another talk.
Be great. Happy to do it.
All right. And guys, thanks so much for tuning in. For Real News 24/7, visit us at sgtreport.com, thephaser.com, and thelibertymill.com. God bless. Bye-bye.
We have a demonic force that is taking over humanity, redesigning us, creating something else other than what it is to be human.